welcome back to Breaking Ground on iProperty Radio with myself, Carol Tallon. You can contact us on social media at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. This week, I'm chatting to Joseph Little, Head of Construction and Building Performance in the School of Architecture, Building and Environment within TU Dublin. Joseph, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Carol.
Joseph, that's a very long title. So you're the Head of Construction and Building Performance within the School of Architecture, Building and Environment. And
yes.
I know that's within the Faculty of Engineering. So talk to us a little about not just the role that you do, but maybe about your career to date.
Okay. I graduated as an architect from the School of Architecture in UCD in 1996. Worked for 3 conventional practices on different scale of buildings over the next 7 years. Realized at the end of the last of those companies, I was with them for 4 years, and realized my increasing concern about the lack of sustainability focus in Irish industry, the Irish construction industry and design practice in general, wasn't going to be met by staying in conventional practice. So I think in a 3-month period, I took up yoga, I changed my diet, I set up a practice on my own, and I started a master's in the Centre for Alternative Technology in mid-Wales. And that was about the only place in English-speaking Europe at the time that you could go to, learn skills and engage and meet other people similar-minded at the time. And I had a wonderful adventure there for a number of years with like-minded people. I met some extraordinary Irish people as well as mostly British, but people from around the world, and learned a lot of skills. And in that time, I started the essays I was writing, I was submitting to the lecturing team. I started converting into articles that appeared in Construct Ireland. I wrote about 15 articles in Construct Ireland. I kind of went beyond the master's period itself and kept going beyond, and then even into Passive House Plus, I was writing articles. And one of the things in retrospect that I was doing was I began to focus more and more on retrofit, on building performance as a specific question. Do we know what we're doing in that area? And a series of papers such as Breaking the Mold 1 to 5 were some of the first times, I think, possibly historically at this stage, that somebody raised the question, do we know what we're doing in retrofit? Are the Agrimo certificates up to scratch? Do we have the training? Do we understand as a profession and as an industry things like thermal bridging, moisture risk, hydrothermal risk, air tightness, different strategies? How do those things come together, and how do we go forward? So that was retrofit quite significant. I was also writing about low carbon materials, about quick tips for homeowners carrying out refurbishments. All those articles are still available, and I'm still teaching using some of them. They're still relevant, possibly sadly they're still relevant now in 2022, and they can be found on the Arrow repository, the TU Dublin Arrow repository, which is a free resource for anyone downloading on a wide range of fronts. But if they put my name in, Joseph Little, they'll find a lot of those articles. So obviously, sorry, I went out from there. Go on.
Joseph, before we move on, I just want to actually thank you for being so open about that, because actually you're the first person I've spoken to out of tens of people around the sustainability, the need or the increasing imperative towards sustainability, that actually talks about it in a holistic way, that actually we know there's a mindset shift needed, and you very rightly identified that it came with this increased awareness that actually was very holistic in terms of diet, yoga, movement, and otherwise. And I think that's really interesting, because I think that's absolutely the experience of people, but we don't talk about it, particularly within the industry. So
interesting. Yeah.
So thank you for doing that.
Yeah. I personally, I'm very interested in the idea. I love history. I suppose I'm a cultural boffin, but I'm also a technical boffin, and sometimes that can be unusual. People sometimes tend to go one way or the other. I'm very interested, and I teach about actually some of the cultural underpinnings of some of the technical things that we do. For instance, we still use a method of risk assessing moisture in buildings, which the dew point method, or nowadays called the Glaser method, which comes from a desire, and I think this is fascinating, to keep meat, beef and lamb frozen safely from Argentina or Australia or New Zealand, to get it onto plates for the Sunday roast in London. And that concern in the 1880s is actually what drove the creation of the U-value method, and then even the U-value calculation, which fed then into the dew point calculation method. And even though there are other better ways of assessing moisture in buildings, and standards associated since 2007, so on, we're still using something that comes from a different tradition and a different even technical culture in the industry, because it's easy and it's because what we have done and what we know. But it's not actually within scope. It's not fit for practice for most building conditions, but it's what we've done, it's what we used to, and therefore we're continuing to do that. So there's really big shifts, and some of those are technological, some of those are standard based, and some of them are cultural.
That's so interesting. Actually, I've never heard that before. But what you're describing does not at all sound like the work of an architect, a typical architect as we would know.
Well, architects are very varied people. There are perceptions, and there's architects I would strongly criticize, and there are some tendencies. There's tendencies. I mean, for instance, there's tendencies in engineers to be, you could say, and this is a stereotype, to be very linear, to address a very clear problem and solve it and it alone. There's tendencies for architects to be very lateral. But actually, if you could bring an architect who's thinking laterally and engaging across a wide range of areas, together with an engineer who's got that focus, you've got a really good team. So I would say we all have failings, and we all have skills and advantages. I would say there needs to be a more technical engagement in architectural education, and I think that's increasing, but maybe not increasing fast enough. But I think we all need to be cross silo. I love talking to people who've had a mixed education, who've come from a range of positions, and I think that brings a richness with it. I think being in one culture, will rarely solve a problem. Will rarely address it as well as it could be.
And that's interesting. Are you seeing that across your student base at the moment?
Yeah, well, for instance, when I'm talking to the architecture students in the undergraduate program here, it's one of the biggest in the state. Yeah, I mean, they're a varied group, and the lecturing team, I'm very glad to say, is a varied group as well. And there's a range of perceptions and perspectives, and some I would say are kind of, let's say old, and ones that I'd like to see shift. And other people are coming from fantastic, I mean, feminist perspectives, universal access perspectives, design culture, aesthetic perspectives, local planning, urban regeneration perspectives, deep environmental perspectives. It is a very rich cohort I'm talking to there. When I look at the MSc in building performance cohort, those students, they're professional postgraduate students coming from architecture, engineering, architectural technology, building surveying, energy assessors, even applied building physics, who've come across that whole perspective. Then I don't even use the names that they come from. I talk about building design professionals, and we're talking about, look, it's your own learning journey is important, but what we need to focus on is the built environment and delivering high quality buildings and understanding how and why they work. Or don't work. So that's the engagement there. So it's definitely a wider engagement.
Is your focus split across delivering new buildings, as in the building performance of newly delivered buildings and those retrofit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Where
And it needs to
and
be.
is it an even split? As in, do you think these are kind of equal priorities?
They are for me. For me, building performance is the key, and that applies to everything in the built environment. Those buildings that are on the page or on the screen are being designed. Those buildings that are being proposed for retrofit. Those buildings that have been built and new. Those buildings that we're looking at in terms of remediation, maintenance, and maybe problematic expert witness kind of territory. So I'm looking at the same questions, and they apply everywhere. It's much easier to do something absolutely right on a greenfield site with a new build building and with a big design team. It definitely gets harder the more we move towards smaller scale buildings, smaller design teams, smaller budgets, and retrofit.
And to be fair, I know that you practice what you preach, because you have just come through a process of deep renovation for a smaller building. You might talk to us about that.
Yeah, well, that was fascinating. Maybe a little bit crazy, but a great adventure. So myself and my wife bought a 1886 Victorian cottage, the kind of window kind of cottage that you'll see in Stony Batter, or many parts of Ireland, but not too far from that area. About, yes, that's 40 square meters. Mass concrete from 1886. A lot of people think that concrete only came into Ireland later than that. It didn't. However, they didn't understand fully concrete in those days. So it was pretty consolidated, pebble-based concrete with uneven aggregate use, binder use. So we're actually treating it almost like a mass concrete wall, like a rubble stone wall, like an old solid stone wall. And therefore we've taken that sort of a approach in terms of our insulation strategies. One thing I was very anxious to do was to deliver something that was very, very breathable. So that's often a big concern of people from, let's say, the heritage historic building perspective, but also something that was super low energy, which often touches on people from, let's say, the super low energy passive house, Enerfit type world, and also very circular. So, so kind of three overlapping concerns: the breathability, historic heritage bit, the low, super low energy, but then also doing, introducing materials that are very low embodied carbon, or in fact even post-consumer or post-construction waste materials used in a really good way to deliver a low carbon, very comfortable property.
Very good. Well, talk to us about the process of that. And what were you, because you're talking about a very small area, and actually, I have never heard of mass concrete in an old cottage. I actually thought, I just assumed wrongly that that was all stone.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
just maybe talk to us about part of the journey for there. Are you, is it finished now?
It is. The painting has to be done, and the floor has to be laid. That's it. It's
But
it.
in terms of the building, that's there. And
Yeah.
but were you able to? Because obviously, sometimes when we talk about sustainability, sometimes there's the criticism that actually the ideal is not achievable. So there's always going to be an element of compromise.
Yes.
So you sound like you were maybe started from a place that you certainly had ideals in place. How much did you need to compromise?
Yeah, good question. There were quite a few compromises. I mean, like you said, the project is a very small project. Because of my role, because of my passion, I was very interested in an exemplary building, and my wife was very patient in that regard, because sometimes exemplary, and if you're building something that could show future directions of where we need to go. Therefore, you're no longer talking about the most readily available, cheapest product, because clearly the cheapest product is the one which is a large volume product made by a large number of companies. Uh, but if you're trying to show something about circularity, a higher use of a greater percentage of biomaterials, a greater percentage of post-consumer, post-construction waste materials, and a high level of circularity in terms of demountability, disassemblability, those sorts of concerns, you're clearly looking at niche products, or what are currently niche products. But if we do more of this, and if we can prove that it can be done and done successfully in Ireland, which I think we have proven, and that's really important, and I need to disseminate that over the next few years, we will encourage people into that sector. So that will then become, more mainstream in terms of pricing and so on. So in terms of compromises, I mean, one thing early on was I wanted to use. Can I name commercial products, by the way?
Oh,
Is that
absolutely,
okay?
absolutely, because this will be helpful for anybody
Yeah.
who's taking on such a project.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think the first thing I should probably then say is that Sirius Construction, SIRIUS, were our builders. And to be honest, we went with them. They're very good, small, medium-sized, conventional builders. I went with them because I trusted them. So to me, in the way, trust was more important than price. I needed to know that these people were going to come with me on a journey. So that's that. In terms of compromises, one thing we were going to do early on was use what's called a Nelan Compact P unit. It's about the size of a tall fridge freezer, where you've got a cylinder integrated with a heat pump integrated with a mechanical ventilation and heat recovery unit. So all three units coming from the same manufacturer. Other companies supplied these. That was the particular one. And it's optimized for all those things to work together. And that would have provided our hot water, possibly a source from our solar panels to feed into, our healthy ventilation, which is terribly important, and so on. And it would have supported decarbonization of the building, which was terribly important, to move from gas to electric. So we did that, but
can I
we
ask you, Joseph, just in relation to the ventilation, because you're talking about such a small area, you said just under 40 square
yeah,
meters. So it's 40 square feet, sorry.
40 square meters.
40 square meters, sorry. Just in terms of the ventilation, is that more or less important when you're talking about a very small area?
In a way, I would almost say it's the most important thing, because frankly, if humans are not being looked after, there's something absolutely wrong. If the indoor environmental quality of the space is not as good or better afterwards, we're doing something absolutely wrong, and everything should actually stop. And the good news is that there's many robust systems. So what I'll tell you, just in terms of that compromise, and I'll segue to answer what you just said. We were going to put in something that turned out to take about 1 square meter of space. My wife possibly quite rightly said, I can't give you 1 square meter space for that thing, albeit it's an excellent piece of technology. And also look at our budget, because it was an expensive project. So what we ended up doing was, because we reached super low energy levels of performance for the walls, the floors, the roofs, the air tightness, and so on, I was able to calculate that we would have a very small energy demand. And that small energy demand could be met by simple electric panel rads fixed to the wall. So we're able to decarbonize, move to electric only, by having, at the end of the day, small electric wall-mounted panels from the Irish manufacturer whose name has just escaped me. It'll come back. Under counter water heater, an electric rad in the shower room, a future solar panel. So we're allowing for a future electric panel at this stage, which makes it easier and quicker to do in the future, but it's outside this current budget. And then in terms of the ventilation, we simply supplied DCMEV, demand control mechanical extract ventilation, by the company Erico, which is again one of the companies out there, but also invented the category AE or ECO. And that's by doing that mix of simple technologies, we were able to reduce budget. And for a very small house, we were able to still provide a decarbonized, low energy supply of space heating, hot water, and then separately ventilation with a very low power demand. So there's an example of a compromise, which actually we were able to turn to something that I was still very comfortable was a high quality solution.
And you talked about trust being the main factor with your contractor, which is understandable, but you also refer to that contractor as a traditional contractor. So were there any issues there in terms of maybe delivering on some of the aspirations that you had for the home?
Great question. So in that context, and obviously I do know a number of people out in the industry, I went to probably Ireland's leading air tightness installer, air tightness tapes and so on installer, and he also specializes in the blowing of cellulose insulation, which of course is post-consumer newspapers, shredded and treated and so on. A man called Roman Shapura from a company called Cleoma, I think it's Cleoma House. They're based in Sligo, but he was willing to come to Dublin for me. There are other people that he would work with around, and there's other people in the space. But basically, because air tightness was a particular thing that needs real high quality skills, and of course, a really good guy will work, a really good person will use less material, do it faster, and do it right the first time than the person who's learning in that space. So I brought Roman and his team in to work with my builder, John, Serious Construction, to deliver a little bit that I felt they would find a little bit more challenging to get to a really high level, a really onerous level. They understood air tightness, but not quite at the level that he did, and they were very comfortable to bring him in into the team as a nominated subcontractor for that role. And I think that combination worked. We've achieved a Q50 value, I was told the other day, by Gavin O'Shea of Greenbuild. Sorry, I'm mentioning lots of people here, of 1.6, so 1.6 meters cubed per meter squared hour. If you consider that the minimum standard for new build is 7.0, and the new build is much easier to deliver, we're delivering at a Q50 of 1.6. So I think that's a great achievement in a retrofit building where there are compromises, where things are harder to control.
Despite your expertise, you were dealing with an 1886 constructed cottage.
Yes.
What did you learn on it?
Well, one thing I learned is that you actually you need to pay a lot of attention, that you need to be there frequently. And sometimes builders would kind of prefer if architects and homeowners stepped aside, and they obviously need to get at their work. But it was useful that I lived nearby, and I was able to come and visit quite a few times. There were conversations about different parts. I mean, one particular conversation was about the roof structure. So it turned out to be not surprisingly, maybe Baltic pine from, obviously trees felled in maybe in 1885 or so. And the perspective of the original engineer and the foreman on site was that, you want a proper house and you want a proper sign off and you want this to be fit for the next 50 years, 70 years, whatever. So replace all the timber structure in the roof. And I was quite thrown by this, even though I was, an architect and have plenty of building experience. When somebody says that and they're people of that experience, it can encourage you to kind of go down to that expense that you didn't foresee and get rid of something. And it was really when I was standing on the scaffolding with the roofer and we're looking up close at those materials that we were both able to say, the roofer and myself, this roof is gorgeous. The timber is, in mint condition. If a piece of timber split or something, or some little thing happened, it probably happened on the day because somebody used too hard a hammer stroke in 1886. Nothing has happened since. So we were able to retain, which was my original ambition, but to be able to do it securely, safely, once we got to that stage. And a tradesperson who comes from that particular perspective gave me great confidence. And then actually we had a later timber focused engineer who absolutely agreed. So in fact, in terms of all the timbers from the building, the skirtings we had to replace, because of some leakage, about a third of the floorboards we had to get rid of. And we had to get rid of the fascia at the front and back of the eaves of the house. But even the wall plates from which the timber structure of the roof springs were actually in very good condition. We didn't have to splice out any of that. So there's a lot of, even though the masonry wall, there were some cracks and compromises that we had to stitch and repair, we were able to keep all the masonry, barring a certain area where we broke through for a new kitchen and so on. But all of the timber structure we were able to retain of the roof, and that was a great thing to be able to do.
Did you encounter any issues in terms of your mortgage lending or financing or insurance?
Good question. We because we had brought some savings into it and there was a little bit of a nest egg coming from my wife's side, we were able to take out a mortgage, which was quite a low mortgage. And I think that helped significantly.
Yeah,
So,
because
it might have been
these
a
are,
third in terms of the financing there.
yeah, no, because these are things, and particularly in terms of embracing new technologies on a self-build project, actually,
Yeah.
that we do find people run into financing and insurance issues. And look, I thank you so much for your time, by the way. I appreciate we've gone slightly over time, but I'm fascinated to hear about the personal project, and it's certainly something I'd love to talk to you about another time.
We can
But,
do, yeah, please do.
my final question today is probably one that you address. It's probably a fallacy that you address with your students on day one, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Um, is there a conflict between design and building performance?
Design in general, or do you mean design for building performance?
No, design as in you're an architecture, you have a vision.
Yeah.
And sometimes, we see it that the vision of a building, whether it's the retrofit of an 1880s cottage, or whether it's the delivery of a new state-of-the-art glass building. In terms of design, does there need to be compromise of design in order to achieve maximum or optimum building performance?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I have strong views on this. I would say a design that does not take account of building performance is a failure. There are different kinds of failures. A building falls down, a wall falls down. That's a failure. But if a building does not deliver on health, on low energy, on even low carbon circularity, these additional areas of building performance that are being brought more and more to the fore, I think it's a failure. I think we have a massive societal, there's a series of global crises. There's a massive societal need for building design professionals to step up, and also for building professionals to step up and to work together and to really understand the impacts of what they're doing. And if somebody's not engaged in understanding the impacts of what they're doing, why are they there?
That's so much to think about, Joseph. My thanks. Honestly, I find that I always learn a lot during these interviews, but you've given me so much more to think about. And in fact, sometimes it's an interesting interview that actually leaves me with more questions than answers. But
Right.
that's not a bad place to be. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Well, let's
That
talk
was
again.
absolutely. That was Joseph Little, Head of Construction and Building Performance in the School of Architecture, Building and Environment within TU Dublin. And that's it from us this week. You can get in touch with the show on social media at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. My thanks to Hear Me Roar production team and to Luke Delaney on sound for Dublin South FM. Until next time, thank you for listening.